With Fortnite passing its first year anniversary, I thought I'd take advantage of this milestone and take a look back at the journey of the most popular weapon in the game, the Scar. The Scar has been in the game since the beginning and has had the most consistent placement in the meta. The Scar came from humble beginnings but quickly reached the hierarchy of weapons in the game. The beginning of Fortnite Battle Royale was a beautiful time. Not many people knew too much about the game, and therefore the player base was not oversaturated at this point. There weren't many tryhards in the game, but one thing was certain: the golden Scar was a god among men due to how high its damage was. We'll get to the exact stats in a second, but the golden Scar quickly became an iconic term in gaming, becoming one of the most associated terms with Fortnite on YouTube, like nukes in Call of Duty or legendary Pokemon in Pokemon. Acquiring a golden Scar in game was considered a godsend and would outclass every other weapon in the game. Now here are the stats of both versions of the Scar on release on September 26, 2017. And I know I've been focusing more on the golden Scar due to its cultural relevance, but the purple Scar was just as capable of dealing insane amounts of damage. The Scar had all the statistics like every weapon, but we're going to be focusing on the more important ones that made the Scar the deadly monster it was. Also, other stats like fire rate were the same for all fully automatic assault rifles, so there's no need to look at them individually. Obviously, the thing that sticks out here is the high damage of the Scars. The epic would deal 37 damage while the legendary would deal 39 damage. Now on paper this doesn't seem too bad. It's a gradual increase in damage from the M16s and it kinda makes sense, but we have to take a moment and talk about headshot multipliers. Today every weapon in the game capable of getting a headshot will increase the damage by 2.5, with the exception of shotguns as they have their own mechanics and assault rifles. Today assault rifles only get a 2 times headshot multiplier, but back in the day this was not the case. This is why a legendary Scar could do 39 damage on the body, then all of a sudden jump to an insane 98 damage on the head. This was very hard to counter for 2 big reasons. Back in the early days of Fortnite, almost nobody was able to fully take advantage of building like the common player can today. A John Wick can whip out a castle in 0.2 seconds, but building a simple 1x1 in September of 2017 took a good amount of concentration and about 10 seconds. We'll get back to this in a second, but the other big reason was the shield epidemic. In the beginning, the only way to get shield was through the big 50 pots. There were no slurps, minis, chug jugs, or even random mushrooms. This was a major issue for a long time because number 1, big pots were still in the blue or rare rarity, meaning they weren't the simplest things to find. Number 2, the limit of carrying these things was still 2, so even if you were lucky enough to find some extra shield, you could only carry 2. And number 3, most people weren't young gods at the game, so if you got into a gunfight, you most likely lost the shield you spent so long to find. All of these things lead back to the absurd 98 damage the Scar could do. So let's set up the most common thing that happened. Most people weren't lucky enough to get shield, so they only had 100 health. Keep in mind this is only 2 more health than a legendary Scar could do in terms of damage. You would then maybe get into a gunfight, get down to 50 health, but only have bandages, meaning you can only get up to 75 health. So at this point you were able to get 1 tapped in the head from either rarity of Scars. Today maybe you could outsmart the player with your building, but like I said earlier, 99% of players did not know how to build, so this led to the Scar being the most sought after weapon in the game. The building aspect was made irrelevant in the following months as the skill level of players increased, but the insane 93 and 90 damage was still considered too high by many players, prompting Epic to reconsider the Scar and automatic assault rifles damages as a whole. Around November 20th through 22nd, Epic issued a hotfix which completely reworked the automatic assault rifles. This is when the 2.5 headshot multiplier was reduced to just a 2 times multiplier across all the automatic assault rifles. The burst and scoped assault rifles headshot multipliers weren't reduced at this point, but instead at a later date. Not only that, but the base damage was also reduced for both versions of the Scar. The epic went from 37 to 35 and the legendary went from 39 to 36. Both of these changes affected the headshot damage as well, dropping the epic from 93 to 70 and the legendary from 98 to 72. This is definitely one of the most brutal nerfs in the history of Fortnite, but it did stop a lot of players from being absolutely destroyed by either Scar. Despite this major setback, the Scar still outclassed its only other competition at this point, the Blue Burst Assault Rifle. During the first Fortnite Invitationals held on December 8, 2017, the legendary Scar was prominently shown when it helped the then up-and-coming streamer Daquan win 2 solo games filled with stiff competition and pro players.
Let's go, baby! What I told y'all! What I told y'all. Get out of my face. Let's go. It's nothing, baby. Let's go.
By the time 2018 rolled around, the average player had become pretty decent at building, and the recent addition of mini shields definitely prevented the Scar from being overpowered like before. Over the span of seasons 2 and 3, the Scar remained the most popular weapon in the game, only ever sharing that position with the double pump before that was nerfed even harder than the Scar back in November of 2017. And even when drop off range was added into the game, the Scar still proved to be consistent and very worthwhile. However, things would change in the beginning of season 4. On May 16, 2018, the assault rifle's only other epic and legendary counterparts were added into the game in the form of the FAMAS. Comparing the legendaries, the Scar's 36 damage still outclassed the FAMAS's 33 damage. However, with the FAMAS being a 3-round burst weapon, if you were pretty accurate with your shots, it was very easy to melt players with this weapon. This is where the fan base was split into 2 parts. If you just like to spray and pray, then you stuck with the Scar due to it being fully automatic. But if you could hit consistent and accurate shots, then either of the 2 FAMASs were a major improvement over the blue burst assault rifle. Even though the FAMAS had all this hype around it due to players instantly building cover whenever shots were being fired, the faster fire rate of the Scar was still preferred by many players. The FAMAS was just too slow to effectively be able to take out building while you're in a fight, despite its other appealing characteristics. With the majority of players sticking with the classic Scar, it seemed as if nothing could get in its way. The Scar would always have use in the meta and would be universally loved by fans. That is until June 27, 2018. This patch introduced one of the biggest changes to the meta, which inadvertently affected the Scars and all of the assault rifles. This update buffed the SMGs to the point where people aren't running Scars anymore. Every single SMG got an additional 2 points of damage added to their total and a major boost in accuracy and range. This impressive combination outclassed the Scar at medium range, which is unfortunately where it saw most of its use. Now don't get me wrong, the Scar wasn't made completely irrelevant in this update. It was still pretty useful in some situations, but effectively running just one SMG could easily outgun the Scar. If that wasn't enough, on July 24th, 2018, the epic and legendary SMGs were finally added into the game in the form of the P90. The thing is, if an uncommon and rare SMG made the Scar used by less players, then imagine what the epic and legendary variants were capable of. The P90 dealt more damage, had more ammo, and had a faster fire rate than the silenced SMG. These characteristics made the Scar almost completely obsolete and easy to counter in a gunfight. After literally an entire year of Fortnite being released, the Scar was finally being knocked down on the list of viable weapons. The sad part about this is that the Scar wasn't being nerfed in these updates. It hadn't even been touched in months, but everything else in the game was getting better and outclassing the Scar in almost every aspect. Thankfully for the Scar, the very next day on July 25th, 2018, all these submachine guns got nerfed to their damage, fire rate, and range. Now that sounds like a lot, but what it mainly did was balance the SMGs by making them more designed for close-up gunfights instead of mid-range battles where assault rifles were expected to be most effective. Although the SMGs were still very useful, the assault rifles found use in the meta once again. And that is actually the current state of the Scar. Going forward, there has to be a buff to the assault rifles if Epic is interested in returning them to their former glory. The meta has become rushing your opponent and facing off with either a shotgun or some machine gun in close quarters build fights. But even from a distance, the accuracy on the assault rifles leaves a lot to be desired, and there's plenty of ways that can be improved on. So that was the history of the Scar in Fortnite Battle Royale. From seasons 1 through 5, the Scars remain extremely consistent despite the addition of so many weapons in that time frame. Even after the extreme nerf in season 1, the Scar was in that top group of weapons that were sought after by everyone jumping off the battle bus. Despite these submachine guns recently taking over, the Scar still deserves recognition for being on top of the food chain for an entire year. Thanks for watching, guys. This video was actually really fun to make, but it did take a while, so tell me down below if you would like to see this made into a series, and if I get to do that, what weapon would you like to see covered next? Thank you again so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in my next video.